What if I told you that the British monarchy as you know it is currently standing on a foundation of absolute, calculated deception? What if the crown worn today was secured not by royal decree, but by a desperate, midnight forgery in the deepest, darkest vaults of Windsor Castle? Right now, behind the towering stone walls of the palace, a civil war has erupted. A leaked report from an ultra-secure insider has just exposed a confrontation so explosive, so unbelievably toxic, that has threatened to shatter the House of Windsor forever. Princess Anne, the steadfast, silent guardian of the late Queen's legacy, has just made a stunning, chilling discovery that changes everything we thought we knew about Queen Elizabeth's final wishes. And at the dead center of this storm? Queen Camilla, caught red-handed, holding the very pen that tried to rewrite British history. Are you ready for the truth the palace is desperately trying to bury? Don't blink. Don't look away. Because what Princess Anne found in that dust-covered archive room is about to change the monarchy forever. To truly understand the sheer magnitude of this crisis, we have to pull back the velvet curtain and look at the decades of simmering resentment, quiet power struggles, and deep-seated distrust that have poisoned the air inside Buckingham Palace long before this explosive moment. This isn't just a sudden disagreement over a piece of paper. This is the absolute boiling point of a silent war that has been raging in the shadows of the British monarchy for over 20 years. On one side of this fierce battleground stands Princess Anne, the late Queen's only daughter, a woman widely recognized as the hardest-working, most fiercely loyal and no-nonsense member of the royal family, and has never cared about the glamour, the cameras, or the glittering titles. Her entire existence has been dedicated to one single, sacred mission, protecting the legacy of her mother and safeguarding the dignity of the crown. On the completely opposite side of this division stands Queen Camilla, a figure whose very presence in the palace has been a source of intense controversy and public division since day one. For years, the traditionalists within the royal household, quietly led by Princess Anne, viewed Camilla's relentless rise from the sidelines to the absolute throne with a mixture of quiet caution and deep suspicion. You see, the tension between these two powerful women is legendary, a quiet clash of values that insiders have whispered about for generations. And the traditionalist who respects the old ways, and Camilla, the ambitious survivor who slowly but surely secured her place at the right hand of King Charles. When Queen Elizabeth II passed away in September of 2022, the delicate balance of power within the family shifted instantly, sending shockwaves through the palace corridors. But while the world was mourning a historic monarch, a desperate and highly secretive scramble was happening behind the scenes. According to highly placed palace sources, the true, private wealth of the late Queen, including a breathtaking collection of personal, priceless jewels, historic land grants, and millions in private funds, became the ultimate prize in an unspoken, high-stakes game of Monopoly. In the United Kingdom, the wills of prominent members of the royal family are not made public. By law and tradition, they are sealed in a secure vault for at least 90 years to protect the privacy of a sovereign. This absolute, impenetrable secrecy is supposed to be a shield, but as Princess Anne would soon discover, it also created the most perfect, dangerous cover for someone wanting to alter history in the dark, where no member of the public could ever look. For months leading up to the Queen's passing, rumors had been swirling among the household staff about intense, closed-door arguments at Balmoral and Sandringham. It was whispered that Camilla was actively and relentlessly lobbying for a massive restructuring of the royal estate, pushing to secure grander titles, permanent security, and unprecedented personal wealth for her own descendants, even at the expense of the late Queen's bloodline. Queen Elizabeth, ever the meticulous protector of the institution, reportedly resisted these aggressive demands, wanting to ensure that the ultimate moral and material legacy of her reign would pass directly to those who had earned it through blood and unwavering duty. This resistance created a silent, boiling feud that divided the palace into two fiercely opposing camps. When the transition of power finally occurred, and King Charles ascended the throne, the traditionalists felt increasingly sidelined. Insider leaks suggest that within hours of the Queen's passing, the access codes to the private royal safes were abruptly changed, and certain archive keys seemed to vanish. Princess Anne, with her sharp instincts and decades of observing palace intrigue, knew that something was deeply wrong. She watched every move, every subtle shift in the household staff, and every strange administrative decision with a watchful, protective eye. She knew that her mother's true, final wishes were incredibly vulnerable to manipulation by those who now held the keys to the kingdom. The stage was set for an inevitable, cataclysmic clash. The fragile truce between the king's fiercely loyal sister and his ambitious wife was built on a foundation of sand, and it was only a matter of time before a single spark blew the entire palace wide open. That spark came in the form of a highly confidential, urgent warning from a terrified former royal staff member. A warning that would lead Princess Anne down a dark, forgotten corridor beneath Windsor Castle, straight into a trap that would expose the most jaw-dropping royal betrayal of the modern era. And what she found waiting for her in that dusty archive room was a discovery so shocking it would freeze her blood. The air inside the forgotten depths of Windsor Castle was thick, cold, and smelled of decaying paper and century-old dust. It was a place untouched by the modern world, a labyrinth of stone-walled corridors that hadn't seen a regular guard patrol in decades. Guided only by the dim, flickering light of a single flashlight and the urgent, trembling voice of a former legal secretary echoing in her mind, Princess Anne navigated the damp passageways. The tip had been specific, terrifying, and impossible to ignore. An unauthorized entry had been logged in the estate registry under the cover of darkness, pointing to a highly sensitive folder labeled Royal Testament 2022. As Anne approached the heavy, rusted iron gate of the deep archive chamber, her heart hammered against her ribs. Pushing the creaking gate open, she stepped into the shadow-draped vault. There, resting on a massive oak table beneath a single, harsh halogen bulb that seemed to have been recently installed, was the official, leather-bound folder. Anne's hand shook slightly as she opened it. Inside, side by side, lay two distinct documents. Her eyes scanned the pages, and she felt a sickening chill run down her spine. The first document was the genuine, original will of Queen Elizabeth II, written in fading, elegant fountain pen ink, and dated months before her passing. The second document was a shock to the system, a freshly written, crisp, handwritten codicil that had never been officially registered. This second document completely rewrote the distribution of the late Queen's private estate. It stripped away historic land grants meant for Prince William, bypassed long-held promises to Prince Harry, and completely omitted Kate Middleton from receiving the iconic, priceless personal jewel collection that the late Queen had publicly promised her. Instead, name after name, heirloom after heirloom, the late Queen's most treasured personal assets were systematically reassigned to Camilla and her immediate, non-royal family. It was a massive, shameless grab of royal legacy. But it was the bottom of the page that made Anne gasp out loud. The signature read Elizabeth R. It looked nearly perfect. The curves, the slant, the royal flourish. But Anne knew her mother's hand better than anyone alive. She leaned closer, her eyes narrowing. The ink on the signature line was shockingly bright. She reached out, her finger hovering millimeters from the paper, and realized with absolute horror that the ink was still wet. It had been signed mere minutes ago. Before Anne could process the sheer scale of the fraud, a soft, deliberate rustle of silk cut through the dead silence of the vault. Anne spun around, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating a figure stepping out from the shadows of a towering bookshelf. It was Queen Camilla. She stood there, completely composed, wearing a dark velvet coat. In her right hand, held casually between her fingers, was a vintage Parker fountain pen, the very pen used to sign the document on the table. For a second, the two women locked eyes, the silence between them heavy enough to crush the stone walls around them. Camilla didn't panic. Instead, she let out a soft, rehearsed sigh, a tight, artificial smile spreading across her face. "Anne dear," Camilla said, her voice dripping with calculated sweetness. "You really shouldn't be down here in the cold. I was simply making sure all the late Queen's private paperwork was properly organized before the official audit team arrives tomorrow. You know how easily these ancient documents can be misunderstood." Anne's voice cut through the air like a steel blade. "Misunderstood, Camilla? You are standing in a locked archive vault, in the dead of night, holding a wet fountain pen over my mother's forged signature. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is high treason." The smile instantly vanished from Camilla's face, replaced by a cold, calculating mask. She took a slow step forward, her eyes darkening. "Treason is a very heavy word, and I am simply protecting Elizabeth's true, final wishes. Wishes she communicated to Charles and me in her final days. Wishes she simply didn't have the strength to write down herself. If she didn't write them, they are not her wishes." And snapped, her anger boiling over. "You have forged the signature of the sovereign. You have violated the trust of this entire nation." Suddenly, the heavy wooden door of the chamber clicked open. A senior royal security officer stepped into the room, alerted by the raised voices, and turned to him, commanding, "Officer, secure this room and seize these documents immediately." But to Anne's absolute horror, The officer hesitated. He looked at Princess and then turned his gaze to Camilla. Camilla slowly raised her hand, her voice incredibly calm and authoritative. "It's quite all right, officer. The princess and I are just finishing up. You may leave us." The officer bowed his head, took a step back, and closed the door, leaving and standing in the dim light, realizing with a wave of pure dread that the rot in the palace went far deeper than she had ever imagined. Camilla looked at her, a chilling look of triumph in her eyes, and whispered, "The world has changed, and you need to decide whose side you are on before it's too late." The heavy iron door clicked shut once more, leaving the two women in a suffocating silence that felt heavier than the stone arches above them. Princess Anne stood frozen, her mind racing as she stared at the empty doorway where the security officer had just stood. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The palace security apparatus, the very shield meant to protect the sovereign and the royal line, was no longer answering to the bloodline. They were answering to Camilla. "You think you've won," Anne said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "You think because you've bought the silence of a few guards, you can steal the crown soul. But you have forgotten one very important thing, Camilla. I am my mother's daughter, and I will burn this house to the ground before I let you desecrate her name." Without waiting for Camilla to respond, Anne grabbed the folder containing both the genuine and the forged wills, clutching them tightly to her chest. Camilla's calculated composure finally fractured. Her eyes widened with sudden, sharp panic, and she took an aggressive step forward, her hand reaching out to snatch the documents. "Anne, stop. Put those back. You have no idea what you're doing. If those documents leave this room, it will ruin everything Charles has worked for. Then let it ruin him," and spat back, dodging Camilla's grasp with the swift, practiced movement of an equestrian. She turned on her heel and marched out of the damp chamber, her boots clicking loudly against the stone floor as she navigated the dark, winding corridors. Behind her, Camilla's desperate whispers faded into the shadows, but Anne knew she didn't have much time. The security officer would report this. The palace gates would be locked. She had to act, and she had to act immediately. But instead of heading toward the king's private apartments, Anne made a strategic, devastating choice. She knew Charles was too compromised, too deeply entangled in his devotion to Camilla to see the truth clearly. Instead, she bypassed the king entirely and drove straight to Adelaide Cottage, the home of Prince William and Catherine. When Prince William opened the door to find his aunt standing on his doorstep in the middle of the night, pale, disheveled, and holding a dusty leather folder, he knew immediately that the long-feared crisis had finally arrived. And didn't waste a single second. She marched into his private study, slammed the folder down on the mahogany desk, and opened it under the bright desk lamp. "Look at this, William," Anne said, her breath shallow. Look at what she was doing in the dark. William leaned over the desk, his eyes scanning the two documents. As he read the forged codicil, seeing his grandmother's beloved personal jewels, the very pieces he had watched her wear with pride, systematically stripped away from his wife, Catherine, and handed to Camilla's family, his face went completely pale. But when his eyes landed on the signature line, and he saw the too perfect, slightly smeared, fresh ink of Elizabeth R., his shock instantly transformed into a terrifying, quiet rage. His hands began to shake, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edge of the desk. "She forged it," William whispered, his voice trembling with an anger that seemed to vibrate through the entire room. "She stood over my grandmother's memory and forged her name. This is a criminal offense. This is fraud." "It is worse than that," Anne said solemnly. "She has the security detail in her pocket. I tried to have the document secured, and the officer refused my command. William, she is systematically taking control of the palace from the inside." Before William could speak, the door to the study opened, and King Charles himself walked in, looking exhausted, frail, and deeply troubled. He had been alerted by palace security that Anne had fled Windsor with highly sensitive materials. He looked at his sister, then at his son, his eyes pleading for peace. "Please," Charles said, his voice raspy. "We cannot do this. We cannot let this destroy the family. And, give me the folder." "No, father," William roared, stepping between his father and the desk, shielding the documents. "You need to look at what your wife has done. She is rewriting history with sheer greed. She has forged Queen Elizabeth's signature to rob Catherine, to rob my children, and to enrich her own bloodline. If you do not handle this immediately, I swear to you, I will call Scotland Yard myself. I will have the police arrest the Queen Consort of England for forgery and fraud." Charles looked as if he had been struck. He staggered back slightly, his face a mask of grief and conflict. "William, please. The scandal. It would destroy the monarchy. The public trust would never recover. The public trust is already gone if we live a lie." William shouted back. But just as the argument reached its absolute boiling point, a sudden, sharp chime echoed from William's phone on the desk. Then Anne's phone buzzed. Then the King's. A synchronized, chilling wave of notifications. William snatched his phone and looked at the screen. His eyes widened in horror. "Oh my God," he whispered. A massive, highly coordinated leak had just hit the internet. A prominent rogue tabloid had just published a breaking, exclusive story with the headline, "Exposed. The true will of Queen Elizabeth II leaves billion-dollar estate and historic jewels to Queen Camilla." Accompanying the article was a high-resolution photograph of the forged document. The very one sitting on William's desk, with the wet ink looking crisp and official. Camilla hadn't just tried to sign the document. She had prepared a backup plan. The moment Anne took the physical papers, Camilla's team had leaked the digital copy to the press, forcing the palace's hand. By releasing it to the public first, she had created a narrative that this was the official, legal will of the late queen. If the royal family tried to deny it now, it would look like they were trying to rob Camilla. William looked up from his phone, his face completely dark. "She's backed us into a corner. She's published the forgery to the world." But Anne looked at the screen, a strange, grim determination appearing in her eyes. "She thinks she's played her final card," and said quietly, "But she doesn't know what else my mother left behind. She doesn't know about the warning." The digital landscape exploded into absolute chaos within minutes of the leak. It was a media blackout's worst nightmare, a wildfire of public outrage and speculation that no palace public relations team could ever hope to contain. Across social media, the hashtag royal forgery and hashtag Queen Camilla trended #1 worldwide, racking up millions of posts in a matter of hours. The leaked photograph of the new will, with its unnervingly perfect, dark signature, was analyzed, zoomed in on, and debated by millions of amateur sleuths, legal experts, and royal enthusiasts. On X, formerly known as Twitter, a prominent forensic document examiner posted a viral thread that completely dismantled the document's legitimacy. "Look at the ink density on the signature line of the leaked document," the expert wrote. "That is fresh, high-viscosity fountain pen ink. It hasn't oxidized or sunk into the fibers of the paper the way ink from 2022 would have. Furthermore, the pressure points in the E and the R don't match the late Queen's known arthritic hand tremors from her final months. This is, in my professional opinion, an incredibly high-quality, very recent imitation." The thread gained over 500,000 retweets in a single hour, fueling a massive wave of public skepticism. The public reaction was deeply divided, bitter, and highly emotional. For millions of people, the narrative of Camilla as an ambitious, calculating figure who had systematically worked her way to the top was instantly revived. A viral TikTok video, which garnered over 10 million views in a single afternoon, showed a side-by-side comparison of Queen Elizabeth's official signed documents from her final years next to the leaked new will. The creator passionately argued, "They are trying to rob Kate Middleton in broad daylight. The late Queen promised her personal jewels to Kate, the future Queen. This new document conveniently hands them all to Camilla's children? It's a total coup." On the other side of the digital war, Camilla's defenders tried desperately to push back, launching their own counter-campaign. Loyalists argued that the late Queen had simply realized the immense administrative pressure Camilla would face as Queen Consort and had quietly chosen to provide for her and her descendants to ensure their long-term security. "The royal family is full of bitter traditionalists who have never accepted Camilla," one prominent royal commentator tweeted. "If the late Queen signed this, it was her right as a sovereign. Prince William and Princess Anne are just throwing a tantrum because they can't control the estate anymore." But the media frenzy wasn't just confined to social media. Major news networks scrambled to cover the unprecedented crisis. In London, outside the gates of Buckingham Palace, hundreds of protesters began to gather in the pouring rain, holding signs that read, "Protect the legacy," and "We want the truth." The atmosphere was incredibly tense, reminiscent of the darkest days of the monarchy in the late 1990s. TV anchors on primetime news channels openly questioned whether the monarchy could survive a scandal of this magnitude. One prominent television host, during a live, heated debate with a palace biographer, did not hold back. "If this document is a forgery, as insiders are heavily hinting, then we are looking at a criminal conspiracy committed within the very walls of Windsor Castle, the host declared to millions of viewers. If Queen Camilla or her associates manipulated the last wishes of Queen Elizabeth, this goes far beyond a family dispute. This is a constitutional crisis that threatens the very legitimacy of King Charles's reign. The public deserves a forensic audit of every single document signed since the Queen's passing. Behind closed doors, the institutional backlash was swift and brutal. High-ranking members of the Privy Council and senior legal advisors to the government reportedly held emergency meetings. The rumor mill inside Parliament was spinning out of control, with whispers that certain MPs were preparing to demand an official, independent investigation into the royal estate's administration. The silence from Buckingham Palace's press office was deafening. They had released no statements, no denials, and no confirmations, which the public took as a clear sign of absolute panic and chaos behind the palace walls. The tension escalated to an unbearable peak when a prominent royal reporter tweeted a cryptic leak from an anonymous cabinet member. The government has been made aware of a second, highly confidential piece of evidence currently in the possession of Princess Anne. If this evidence is made public, the current structure of the royal family will be completely untenable. The world watched with bated breath, the dividing lines drawn, as the pressure on King Charles to make a defining choice reached a critical, explosive boiling point. The narrative was no longer about a simple family inheritance. It had become a global battle for the very soul of the British crown. The digital storm was raging outside, but inside the private library of Adelaide Cottage, the silence was suffocating. King Charles stood near the window, his shoulders slumped under the weight of a crisis he could no longer control. On the desk, the phones of everyone in the room continued to vibrate with relentless, mocking intensity, each buzz representing another headline, another social media explosion, another blow to the credibility of the crown. William stood rigid, his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on his father. The press has the fake will, father. Camilla's team has made their move. Now, we make ours. I'm calling a press conference and I am presenting the original document. We let the forensic experts expose her on the global stage. You can't do that, William, Charles pleaded, his voice breaking with a mixture of exhaustion and desperation. If you expose her, you expose the institution. The crown will not survive a public trial of the Queen consort. Then the crown should have protected its own integrity, William fired back, his voice echoing off the high-vaulted ceiling. Princess Anne, who had been standing quietly in the shadows near the fireplace, slowly stepped forward. In her hands, she held the small, heavy wooden box she had recovered from the late Queen's private study. She placed it gently on the desk, right next to the disputed wills. There will be no public trial, William, and said, her voice remarkably calm, yet filled with an absolute, chilling authority. Because the argument is already over. Charles looked at the box, his breath catching in his throat. And, what is that? This is the warning, Charles, and whispered. She opened the latch and reached inside, bypassing the ancient diary entries and the historic locket. She pulled out a small, metallic object, a modern, high-grade digital voice recorder, disguised as an antique brass paperweight. My mother was meticulous, Charles. She knew that as her health failed, those around her would grow desperate. She knew who had access to her chambers, and she knew what they were capable of. And pressed the play button on the side of the device. A soft hiss of digital static, then the unmistakable, clear, and resonant voice of Queen Elizabeth II fills the room. If you are playing this recording, the late Queen's voice began, steady and unwavering. It means my fears have been realized. It means that the greed of those who married into my family has finally overridden their duty to the crown. Let it be known, with absolute clarity, that my personal estate, my jewels, and my private archives are to pass solely to my beloved granddaughter-in-law, Catherine. Any document, any signature, or any codicil produced after the date of this recording that contradicts this decree is a falsehood, created without my consent, under duress, or through outright deception. I charge my daughter and my grandson, William, with the execution of this, my true and final directive. The recording clicked off, leaving a dead, ringing silence in the room. Charles sank slowly into a nearby armchair, his face entirely drained of color. He looked up at, and, his eyes filled with absolute defeat. She knew, he whispered. She knew what Camilla would do. She knew, and agreed coldly. And she left us the ultimate shield. William leaned forward, his hands resting on the desk, staring directly at his father. The recording is absolute, father. The forgery is exposed. But there is one final detail you need to know. The legal secretary who tipped us off didn't just find the documents. He found the ledger of who accessed the vault. William slowly slid a printed sheet of paper across the desk toward Charles. Look at the time of the entry, Father. Camilla wasn't in that vault alone. Someone authorized her bypass of the security protocols. Someone with the king's personal, encrypted clearance code. Charles stared at the paper, his eyes widening in sheer, paralyzing horror as he realized what his son was implying. William's voice dropped to a dangerous, quiet whisper. The code used was yours, Father, which means you either gave it to her, or you were the one who helped her plan this from the very beginning. Charles opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. William turned toward the door, his face a mask of cold fury. I am leaving for Buckingham Palace. And by morning, the world will know exactly who signed that paper, and who helped them do it. This is a betrayal that goes all the way to the top, and the British monarchy will never be the same again. Now, I have to ask you, what do you think is the real truth here? Did King Charles actually betray his own mother and son by giving Camilla his personal security code? Or did Camilla steal it from him in a desperate bid for power? And what should Prince William do next? Should he go public and call Scotland Yard, even if it completely destroys his father's reign? Or should he protect the institution at all costs? This drama is unfolding by the minute, and we are working tirelessly with our inside sources to bring you the very next update. If you want to be the first to know what happens when William reaches Buckingham Palace and confronts Camilla head-on, you need to act right now. Hit that subscribe button, turn on your notification bell, and smash the like button to help us get this truth out to the world. Share your theories in the comments below. We read every single one of them. Stay tuned to Crown Watch, because the next chapter of this royal war is about to blow wide open. See you in the next video.